All right, let's begin by talking about inflation. It's come in. The CPI has come in at 4.91% for the month of November year on year. That's the highest in 3 months. It's inside the price band or inside the band that is within the RBI's tolerance level, which is 2 to 6%, but it has been continuously sticky. In urban areas, it's even higher at 5.54%. Our consulting editor, Maithili Bhusramath, is now joining us to break down the numbers.
This evening, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation released the Consumer Price Index inflation number for the month of November 2021. The number came at the lower end of most market expectations and estimates at 4.91. This is higher than the October number of 4.48, and it would seem as if, going by expectations that the RBI has nothing to worry about, and what they had predicted in the MPC meeting and what the governor's statement had said has been largely borne out by the November numbers. But it would be a little naive to draw that conclusion simply from 1 month's numbers, because if you look at the comparable number for November 2020, which is the base against which the November 2021 numbers are measured, then in November 2020, we had an inflation of 6.93. So this base effect, which gives an illusion that November 2021 inflation was not so high, you should look through that and remember that when world over inflation is so high, and even in a country like the US, the November inflation has come in at 6.8%, a 40-year high. One cannot expect inflation in India to remain an outlier. It is only a matter of time before inflation inches up in India too, and we will see that happening in January and February next year, which is why the RBI also estimated that in the fourth quarter of this current fiscal, we'll see inflation inch up to 5.8%. To my mind, that is a little bit of an optimistic expectation, given the fact that inflation all over the world is growing, given the fact that oil prices are still high and we are a huge oil importer. So as of now, I would say it is a little early for us to relax our guard, though the RBI clearly has relaxed its guard, and it continues to put growth on the front burner and inflation flighting on the second. So particularly, we must remember that core inflation, that is inflation excluding food and fuel, are still very high. As per the governor's own admission, it has been at about 6% since July 2020. With those kind of numbers, I think it's a little early in the day for us to feel the battle against inflation has been won. I would say it's an ongoing battle, and it is high time the Reserve Bank turned its attention towards inflation fighting and removed some of its focus from growth.
Siddhartha Sanyal, Chief Economist and Head Research, Bandhan Bank, joins us on the show. Madan, Sabnavis, Chief Economist, Care Ratings, on the show with us. Welcome to both of you. Let me begin with you, Mr. Sanyal. Do you agree that the battle against inflation is definitely not won, but the fight is actually just beginning for India?
Yes, the fight has possibly begun already, but increasingly the overall situation has got a little more complicated over the recent months, and I don't really see any reason why the overall level of complication will ease anytime soon, because the overall recovery in growth is just in nascent, tentative, and uneven steps. But inflation had been sporadic in India as well as globally, and pressure points came from various corners off and on. So overall, the situation is such that there is no clarity that or growth recovery will only be gradual once the favorable base effect eases over the course of the next couple of quarters, and there is no certainty that inflation will remain under check. So you have to prioritize as a central banker, and what the RBI is possibly doing continuously so well.
Well, the RBI has pitched for growth. In fact, they have projected that Q4 will have an inflation of 5.7%. Madan, Sabnavis, in the broader picture, it's widely known that the headline inflation number is indicative but doesn't nearly encapsulate the real inflation that the Aam Aadmi feels, that the common man feels. Is it fair to assume that that pressure is much higher than what this 4.91% is showing us right now?
Absolutely, because if you're talking of the Aam Aadmi, I think the Aam Aadmi realizes that he or she is actually paying 80 rupees a kilo for tomatoes. And here we are saying that the CPI is showing that vegetable inflation is negative. So definitely there is a disconnection between what we face at the marketplace and what these statistics show. But I think that is the problem which you have with any kind of an inflation index. And I think we'll continuously have this issue of saying that there's a base effect which brings it down, a base effect which will push it up. So I think as we get low inflation numbers this year, next year they will go up on account of the base effect again. But I think the unfortunate part is that there is absolutely no effort being made to bring down prices. So that's why I feel that it's not a case of saying that monetary policy is going to control it. Yes, in case we do increase interest rates, we can curb extra demand side forces, which can probably stop the acceleration of inflation. But on its own, I don't think we can control prices. Because if you look at the way in which the prices have been going up, most of the services have seen higher prices, input costs have gone up, so your personal product prices are going up. So transport, communication, your Vodafone, Airtel have all increased prices of your telecom services. So I think all companies have been protecting themselves by increasing prices, and that's something over which nobody really has any control. So I think it's just a case of saying that nature is going to take care of it in terms of the numbers looking artificially low or artificially high as we are seeing today.
What really can be done furthermore, apart from the RBI, which of course feels the compulsion to support growth at this nascent stage of recovery? Mr. Sanyal, that question for you. We've already seen one round of excise duty cuts on petrol and diesel. Most states have followed. But is that nearly enough? What more can be done?
Well, actually, the role of monetary policy in controlling the current phase of inflation can actually be very, very limited, because there has been a lot of pressure had actually they are coming from global price pressures, on which Indian monetary policy will have very little control. Possibly at a global level, monetary policy might have some role there. And indirectly, if the other central banks and large central banks keep on tightening further, then there might be some bit of indirect pressure from a different channel on RBI. But directly, the role of RBI in controlling global led prices is very little. Also, the other component is perishables, vegetables, protein prices, all these things, where a huge complication in the, unfortunately, we have seen of late in the last few quarters from some weather-related aberrations. So that is, for whatever reason, that has happened a lot more frequently in the last few quarters than usual, and that is complicating the food prices related price movements. The one particular aspect which was also causing a lot of difficulty of late, or causing a lot of concern in the earlier part of the year, that industrial metal prices, etc., had also been going up very significantly. That seemed to have got contained a bit at the moment. But at the same time, as Madan also indicated to some extent, that some of the services related prices, not only in case of India, globally also, they seem to be putting some pressure. So all in all, there had been multiple pressure points on which the role of monetary policy, or Indian monetary policy in particular, is fairly limited, if at all. So in that kind of a situation, it needs to come more from supply side management, maybe importing some of the commodities to stabilize demand supply balances in certain commodities in a very quick response kind of fashion, which we really need to see occasionally. Earlier, we have seen imports of tomatoes, potatoes, onions, sugar, all these things. Maybe this kind of initiatives can step in. Maybe some of the duty adjustments in some of the items like edible oils and all, which we have seen off and on even in the recent past. This kind of things might have to play a bigger role. But largely, also energy prices and pump prices of gasoline and diesel might have to play a role. But as such, relying too much on monetary policy in managing this inflation will do very little help to inflation control, but might have other damaging impact on the recovery process.
Absolutely. Madan, what would you say that we need to do now? And, look at how it's going to impact, say, urban poor. What is going to be the real world impact of inflation inching up? Will it effectively now hamper consumer demand, consumer sentiment, which is just beginning to show some improvement?
No, absolutely, Tamanna. This is exactly what is happening, because when we are talking of high inflation, it affects all of us. So our real income decreases, which means that A, my discretionary consumption comes down, and B, even our savings get affected. And I think the role of the RBI here is important, because as long as we are keeping negative interest rates, I think it's affecting savings. See, normally we tend to talk about it from the point of view of the borrower. So I think today it's a very good situation for the borrower, where we're saying the repo rate is say 4%, inflation is say 5%, you're getting a minus 1% rate, which is actually good for the borrowers, because they're getting home loans at 6.5%, which is quite ridiculous. But today with this high inflation, what happens is that we are spending more on food products, we're spending more on non-food products. As a result of it, my overall ability to consume goods which are supposed to have those virtuous backward linkages with investment, I think that gets thwarted. And second is, of course, my overall savings rate, by saving ability to save comes down as I'm spending more on necessities. So I think this is why I think there is need for the RBI to draw a balance between growth and inflation. True, increasing interest rates is not going to bring down inflation, but at some point of time, I think we had seen the RBI in the past talk about maintaining a real interest rate. Probably that is something which has to come back on the discussion table.
From the government side, what more can be done? We talked a little earlier about how excise duties were cut. That was a long-standing demand. Is there more scope there, Madan?
I think there's very much limited scope, because even when we have seen the excise duty come down by 10 rupees, at least where I stay here in Mumbai, we have seen that petrol and diesel are both reigning at about 100 rupees. I've not really seen the prices come down, even though the global price of crude has come down from 85 to 75, 70. It's of course been fairly volatile. So I think there's limited thing which can be done by anyone, because I think if there were easy solutions through a central bank or through the government, I think inflation would have been conquered across the world. But the answer is that we are going through a phase where there is a commodity boom, demand is greater than supply, and we will have to live with inflation, and we need to adjust to it. And besides, again, going back to agriculture today, it's nice that we are saying that the food inflation is down to 2% or 1.5% or whatever the number is. But the fact remains that we have certain policies when we talk of the MSP, where there's an inherent tendency to say that I want to take sides of the farmers, make sure I want to placate the farmers. So I'm moving away from the market system. So I think the government doesn't want to really get involved in the agricultural front, because I think there's a lot of politics which is involved. So therefore, you would like to continue to make sure that the farmer gets a higher price. Now, this is a zero-sum game. If farmers get a higher price, you and I will have to pay the higher price for it. So I think these kind of contradictions are very much there. And all I can say is that there's nothing that can be done. We have to live at higher inflation. And I think this is a global phenomenon. And as and when it corrects, we will probably draw the benefits. But as of now, I don't see any solution coming from the government. Because even if you look in terms of importing, like you can't import tomatoes. And we have seen in the past, by the time you want to import onions, you have to put on tenders. That takes 1 month, 2 months. You have to follow certain processes. And by the time the onions have come to the shore, to the ports, we have realized that the crisis is behind us. So I don't think there will be too much of intervention coming from the government. One will just hope that statistically we'll get a lower number next month, and then we'll again say that is inflation going back towards 4%. But I think we are ingrained with inflation around 5.5% to 6%. And India is basically an economy where the CPI inflation will be 5 to 6%. By chance, we have gotten numbers below 4% in the past.
Okay. And you know, the other factor about inflation that also needs to be focused on is it sometimes becomes a political issue. Right now, it doesn't seem to be a raging political issue, and perhaps that's why there is some breathing space there for any quick jerk kind of movement on inflation. That doesn't take away from the fact that it is going to be pinching people's pockets, especially the urban poor. Thank you so much, Mr. Sanyal. Thank you so much, Madan, for joining us on the first chat today.